Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So there's a recent development in Arkansas where they waived the requirement for letters of credit on their state grants. So could this potentially be some hope maybe that the same might happen with BEAD grants? I don't know, but let's take a look at it in just a minute. Hey, thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So I wanted to talk about this story. So this is in light reading. It's from Nicole Ferraro here. So I want to go through this. You see here, wireless win in Arkansas offers WISPs hope on federal front. A fixed wireless internet service provider, WISP, recently won a state-level battle that could help more wireless companies get in on broadband grants. And this is not just for wireless companies. This could be any smaller operator that doesn't have the financial ability maybe to double up on the amount of money that they need to be able to do some of these grants. So this is good news. Now it's just specifically about Arkansas and specifically about their state broadband program, but this could portend, this could possibly be good news, maybe where this could be something that they might consider, now that this is being done here, maybe something that they might consider for BEAD. So it could be something that might influence the NTIA. I don't know, but I think it's good that it happened. So Aristotle Unified Communications, they're a WISP serving Central Arkansas and Arkansas Delta. So I guess it's another WISP, successfully persuaded Arkansas Broadband Office to drop a proposed letter of credit requirement from its grant program, allowing providers to instead submit a performance bond. So basically what was going on is that in an emergency kind of legislative act, they proposed this where they're going to do a letter of credit. That was back, I think, in July or so, and it was argued that this was not good for broadband deployment in general, and especially for smaller operators like WISPs like this. So the proposed rule for Arkansas Rural Connect broadband program would have required providers to maintain a letter of credit equal to 100% of the grant award amounts distributed to the internet service providers. So to give you an example of how onerous that is, the letter of credit that everybody's complaining about in the BEAD program is 25%. It's got to be at least 25%, not 100%. So what does this mean, a letter of credit? So basically that means that you have to go to a bank and deposit that money in an account, and then they'll give you a letter of credit that says, hey, they have the money, but you got to leave that money in the account. So you can't use it. It's not working capital that you can use. You basically, if you have, in this case, let's say you have a $10 million grant that you get from the state of Arkansas here, you would have had to deposited $10 million in the bank, and it has to stay there until you built the network, I believe. It's not like it goes down. It just has to stay there. So that money's sitting there, plus you have a fee that you have to pay on top of that to the bank. And then you can't use that money, and it makes it more difficult for you to get funding, capital. And plus, again, you can't use it, and then it makes it harder to get any other kind of credit for building that out. So. Both AUC and the Wireless Internet Service Providers Association, or WISPA, persuaded the state to forego that rule, according to a document shared with light reading. Letters of credit are costly, burdensome, and have several negative financial consequences for providers, wrote AUC CEO Elizabeth Bowles, with support from WISPA in a letter to ARC broadband manager Judge Stephen Porch in August. These facts ultimately will inhibit deployment of broadband in Arkansas by excluding smaller providers who are otherwise qualified to participate in the program, and by chilling participation by even larger providers who do not wish to tie up their assets just to support a letter of credit. Because again, that's what you're doing. You're tying up money that you can't use. The whole purpose of that is that if you default in some way, then that letter of credit basically says that you've got the money in the bank and you can pay it. Pointing to grants distributed by the ARC program prior to the proposed rule change, Bowles noted, had letters of credit been required during the last round of ARC awards, this would have put between $1.25 million and $6.24 million annually, $3.7 million or $18.3 million over 3 years in bank accounts and not in broadband deployment. Because again, people would be depositing this money in the bank and it would just be sitting there and not being used for broadband. Instead, requiring performance bonds will help providers who may not have liquid assets to meet federal requirements for a letter of credit, thereby smoothing the path for those providers to participate fully in the ARC program, Bowles said. So the reason for the letter of credit, again, is to protect us, the consumers, protect taxpayers, especially when this money is coming from taxes, because, again, you don't want money to be handed out, and then let's say a company go bankrupt, and then suddenly all that money's been spent, and it's not been basically used the way it should be. So that's the point of it. But again, letter of credit is very onerous. And there's some differences between letter of credits and a performance bond. So the performance bond can do some of the same things, but it's not quite as onerous. So a letter of credit requires that deposit. The fees are 0.5% to 1% fee on top of that deposit, and then the bank's got to pay that regardless of the circumstances. So if there's a demand from whoever it is, it could be the state or whoever makes a demand for that money, then the bank just has to pay it. There's no arguments. Whereas a performance bond, there's no deposit, so you don't have to deposit that amount of money. It's more like insurance. So instead of putting 25% or 100% of the grant amount in an account, basically it's like insurance where you're going to pay a premium. So a surety company, insurance company says, yeah, we'll go ahead and insure this, and it's like paying a premium. So it's like, kind of like you pay a premium for, let's say, homeowners insurance, right? So you're not having to pay, let's say your house is worth $250,000. You don't have to pay $250,000. You don't have to put that in the bank. You pay a monthly premium, and the insurance company is taking a risk that, okay, your house isn't going to burn down. So depending on the risk, they're going to charge you more or less of a premium. And it's the same thing with these performance bonds. They're going to look at who it is that's requesting the bond, what they think the risk is, and then you're going to have to pay a premium. So it's much better for these smaller operators to be able to do a performance bond. Claims can be adjusted also. So unlike the letter of credit, if there's a claim on this, the insurance company or the surety company can challenge that and look at all of the circumstances and say, wait a minute, this shouldn't be paid out because of some circumstance, versus a letter of credit where it's just the bank's got to pay it. And then also, I think with these, the premium goes down over time. So as the service provider starts to build out the network and there's less money at risk, then I believe the premiums go down, similar to your insurance premiums would go down if the value of whatever you're insuring goes down. In this case, it's not the value, the risk is going down, I guess, in this case. So that's why this is much better. So I think this is a great alternative, and hopefully something that the NTIA will look at as an alternative. I don't know how much leeway they have. Actually, they're going to be requiring the states to do this letter of credit. I'll look at that here in a minute, but maybe there's some leeway where they can make a ruling and change that. AUC, a winner in the first round of ARC grants, has received nearly $31 million in state broadband grants thus far to build out fixed wireless. So that's just, I guess, from ARC grants, because I look back and so this company was founded in 2010. In 2018, they won $12.2 million in CAF2 funding. So CAF2 was the predecessor to RDOF. So that was money that was coming from the FCC through USF funds, and they won $12.2 million there. Then in 2020, they won $30.8 million from CARES funding. That was the coronavirus package that was passed, so the CARES Rural Connect. So $30.8 million from that in 2020, and then $62 million in 2021 through RDOF funds. So again, RDOF is funded through the USF, coming through the FCC. So with RDOF, they had to do a letter of credit, and it's the same, the BEAD, what they're looking to do with BEAD is the same that they were doing with RDOF and letters of credit, which means, again, at least 25% of that grant amount has to be in a letter of credit plus bankruptcy letter as well. So they had to do that for RDOF when they were awarded, when they were declared ready to be authorized. The FCC said, okay, we've looked at your long form application and you're ready to be authorized. Everything looks good technically, financially. Now you just need to send us a letter of credit and a bankruptcy letter, and then we'll authorize you. So they've obviously done that for their RDOF funds. But again, it makes it more difficult for them to build this infrastructure out. So through all of this, through all the building that they've been doing and leveraging some of these federal funds, they now pass about 77,000 households, or they serve, I think they serve 77,000 households, I believe, that's what I read. Let's see, bigger picture. The state level win is part of a larger story and bigger fight for wireless companies eager to participate in the NTIA's $42.5 billion BEAD program. And again, it's not just wireless, because, I mean, for example, a lot of our customers are small internet service providers. These are cable companies or phone companies that might be in one town. They just serve the one town, so they're in between the big guys. They have the big cable MSOs or big phone companies bordering them, but they're serving a community or maybe multiple communities. But that's a lot of the customers that we have, and it's difficult for them if they've got to do these letters of credit as well. Indeed, let's see. As currently written, the funding rules for BEAD require subgrantees to maintain a letter of credit with a minimum value equal to 25% of the grant amount. Indeed, while Aristotle and wireless reps have won their battle in Arkansas for now, the state will likely have to revisit the rule when it starts distributing BEAD funding, given the federal requirement for a letter of credit, if it's not rolled back. So again, I don't think the way the NOFO, and we'll look at it here in a minute, the way the NOFO is written, there's no leeway for the state to say, we'll do a performance grant. I think the states and service providers and everyone that's involved is going to have to put pressure on the NTIA to make that change. The letter of credit is just one of several issues wireless companies have with NTIA's funding rules for the BEAD program, which prioritizes fiber builds and omits projects using unlicensed spectrum. So if you're a wireless operator and you're using unlicensed spectrum, and it could be good spectrum, it could be unlicensed CBRS, that's mid-band spectrum, very fast, but you just don't have a priority access license. Well, that does not qualify for BEAD funding. So you actually have to become licensed for that spectrum, CBRS spectrum, if you want to offer that. So that's one thing that some wireless providers have heartburn with there. NTIA Chief Alan Davidson had repeatedly said that while BEAD prioritizes fiber, it will also fund non-fiber projects. He has said that. But again, if you're going to be doing wireless, it's got to be licensed. And the only other options, you could, I don't think DSL is in there. So the other option would be cable, right? So you got cable, you've got fiber, and you've got fixed wireless using licensed spectrum. Satellite is not considered, you could do satellite, but it's not considered reliable, I think, what they call reliable internet in the BEAD NOFO. The NTIA has yet to offer clear guidance on whether it will change the letter of credit requirements that is set in the BEAD NOFOs. That said, Assistant Secretary Davidson has in the past noted he has heard from several parties how burdensome the letter of credit requirements are, said a WISPA spokesperson in an email to Light Reading. So yeah, so he's heard from folks on this, but he hasn't yet determined what he's going to do there. He says, we remain hopeful that, like Arkansas, those requirements will move to less burdensome performance bonds, opening up the process to more players, especially smaller ones, and thus increasing the odds that the IIJA through BEAD closes the digital divide, the spokesperson added. WISPA said in its talks with other states on letters of credit and other issues related to broadband funding, and it has urged, hang on one second, I'm sure I'm reading that right. Gotta move something out of my way here. Yeah, WISPA has said in talks with other states on letters of credit and other issues related to broadband funding, and it has urged the FCC to change letter of credit requirements for its broadband programs as well. Oh, I'm sorry, that's where I misread it. WISPA said it is in talks with other states. I misread that, on letters of credit. Well, that's good. So they're talking to other states, and again, this will bring it in front of other states and make sure that they are aware of this issue, even if maybe providers in other states haven't brought it up yet to them. So that's good. So Chris Eystone says, correct me if I'm wrong, but smaller ISPs today meet USDA Reconnect requirements without complaining, and it's 100% of award, not 25% like BEAD. Providers that don't have sufficient capital should not be building networks. Starry is a good example. Yeah, Starry's, I don't know. Starry is probably not a good example. I think they got ahead of themselves there, and they bit off way more than they could chew. And I think they actually looked at the letter of credit requirements. So I see what you're saying there. So they looked at the letter of credit requirements and said, you know what, we can't do this. But again, with the letter of credit requirements, that they're having to take 25% of that money and put it in the bank, performance bond will help protect people and be a little bit less onerous. So you're right, though. I see, let's see, smaller ISPs today meeting the USDA Reconnect without complaining, and it's 100% of the award, not 25% like BEAD. I don't know for that for sure. I'd have to look that up with USDA as to whether there's a letter of credit and if it's 100%, not 25%. So I know USDA, it's got, you can do 100% loans, you could do 100% grants, you can do a mixture, 50-50. But I'm not sure about the letter of credit part. But certainly USDA, that is aimed at rural providers. So a lot of the providers that are taking advantage of USDA funds. They're quite often are, like local phone companies, the kind of ones I was talking about, that where maybe they're serving small areas, or maybe they're maybe large areas, but lots of spread out people. So it's very expensive for them to deploy broadband. I'm not sure about that, Chris, though. I'll certainly look into that. So I did want to show you the what's in the BEAD NOFO. Each eligible entity, so this is the letter of credit section of that, each eligible entity shall establish a model letter of credit substantially similar to the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund letter of credit. Again, that's 25%. During the application process, prospective subgrantees shall be required to submit a letter from a bank that meets eligibility requirements, consistent with those, blah, blah, committing to issue an irrevocable standby letter of credit in the required form. Let's see, prior to entering into any subgrantee agreement, each prospective subgrantee shall obtain an irrevocable standby letter of credit of no less than 25% of the sub-award amount. So it's not 100%, but it's 25%. Prospective subgrantee shall provide with its letter of credit an opinion letter from legal counsel clearly stating that the bankruptcy court would not treat the letter of credit or proceeds of as property of the winning subgrantee's bankruptcy estate. So again, they just want to make sure, in addition to that, that if the company were to go bankrupt, that money that's in the bank account, that letter of credit, would not go to that proceeding. So those are two requirements that were part of RDOF. And again, with RDOF, that's done as the very last stage. When the FCC finally looks at everything and they say, okay, you're approved, then the company has to go out and get that letter of credit and get that bankruptcy letter, that opinion letter. So it may be similar, the states may do something similar with that. But again, it's very possible that the states will look at the letter of credit and then determine that, you know what, a performance bond would be another option. Maybe they give the states, maybe the NTIA gives the states the option. You can either do letter of credit or you can do performance bonds, because one of the things with this funding program is the federal government is trying to leave a lot of this up to the states because the lay of the land is different. So it could be in some states where they're going to have to use maybe some smaller operators because of just the topography and who's there and who's interested, where if they really want to get people stepping up to the plate on some of these really difficult areas to work with, and it might be an area where maybe only fixed wireless is going to work well, that maybe they need to have an option where, you know, they cannot afford to do, let's say, a 25% letter of credit on that. So I think if they were doing anything, they'd leave it up to the states and maybe give them the option. But I think having that option would be good there. And I agree with you that providers that don't have sufficient capital should not be building networks. I think the difference is that this is capital that they have to deposit in the bank and they can't use. So they might have enough money without having to do that to be able to do the job, and maybe to get, let's say, to get some loans from the bank to be able to do the job. But if they have to take all of that money and put it in the bank, then that doesn't leave them with any working capital. So then what are they going to do with that? So I think that's the challenge. But if you are requiring them to at least get a performance bond, a surety bond, then you're protected. There's a company out there that's backing that and saying, okay, we've looked at them and we're going to ensure that they complete this project, and if they don't, then we will pay out. Again, they can look at that if there's some default, and they can determine if there are any extenuating circumstances, but it does provide some protection there. So I think it's a good idea. But Chris, I will look into that on the USDA. I'm curious about that myself now as to whether there is that letter of credit requirement in there. Thanks for joining me. I think this could be good news. I guess we'll see. We'll find out what the NTIA decides to do eventually on that, whether they do go ahead and make that change. Let's see, Chris says, we have applied to reconnect for grants. They require a letter of credit for 100% of the requested award amount. So it sounds like you've applied for this and have seen that yourself. So thanks for letting me know that, Chris. Thanks for joining me. If this was helpful or you like this, go ahead and give a like on the video. And if you're not subscribed, click the little subscribe button down on the YouTube video or underneath on YouTube and subscribe. Click the bell to be notified when I'm live. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time for Broadband Deployment News. Take care. Bye-bye.